It was August 13th, 2020, in Lancaster, California. Late that night, a security camera at an apartment complex recorded a man dragging a large bag across the property. The footage, recorded by someone's front door camera, shows him pulling it along the ground and eventually moving out of frame. The footage itself wasn't particularly alarming at the time, so no one really gave it much attention, but it would end up being crucial for an investigation into one of the most disturbing recent home recordings. The man seen in that footage was Josimar Cabrera. He was originally from Peru and had moved to the United States with his wife, Sheila Gutierrez Rosillo, and their 3 children. Like many families, they came looking for stability and a better future, eventually settling in Lancaster, California, where they lived together in an apartment complex along Lancaster Boulevard. To people around them, they looked like a normal family trying to build a life. They were raising their children, living in a residential area, and keeping to themselves. But according to Sheila's family, things inside the home were very different. Her mother, Helga Rosillo, later said that Sheila had been dealing with domestic abuse, both physical and verbal. She had also confided in neighbors that he was abusive, and close friends and relatives would also say that Sheila had been talking about leaving the relationship as she was planning to ask for a divorce, and that she intended to file a criminal report against Josimar. Sheila had been in constant contact with her mother and had only recently video called her during this time. According to her mother, Josimar was listening to their call and appeared angry. Sheila later called her again to say she was taking her children to the park. This was the last time they ever spoke. When her mother tried to call her again sometime later, there was no response. Messages went unanswered, and no one could get in touch with her directly. Her mother reached out to Josimar to ask where Sheila was. He told her that immigration authorities had detained her, but when other family members began asking the same questions, his explanation started to change. Some were told that Sheila had left him for another man. Others were told that she had been involved in an accident. He refused to give details, and no one was able to confirm any version of the story. As the days passed, it became clear that different members of the family were being told different things. With no contact from Sheila and no consistent explanation for her disappearance, the family reported her missing on August 12th. As the investigation got underway, authorities in Los Angeles County began focusing on the apartment complex where Sheila lived with Josimar and their children. Detectives looked through the surrounding area and started reviewing any available surveillance footage, hoping to piece together a clearer timeline of what had happened. That's when they found footage from the apartment complex itself. The video showed Josimar dragging a large object across the property, wrapped inside what looked like a large piece of material. The recording placed him outside the apartment late at night, moving something heavy away from the unit. Then, on August 13th, members of the Montrose Mountain Search and Rescue Team were sent to search parts of the Angeles National Forest. During that search, they located an object consistent with what was seen in the surveillance footage. That material was later confirmed to contain the body of Sheila Cabrera. From that point on, homicide investigators began trying to locate Josimar, but when authorities went back to the apartment complex to find him, no one was home. He was already gone. In the days following Sheila's disappearance, he left California with their 3 children and traveled to Mexico City before continuing to Peru. When he arrived in Lima, Peruvian authorities were already aware of the situation. Investigations had been opened in the United States, and there were prior complaints involving physical and psychological abuse. Josimar was questioned after landing, but at that point, there was nothing in place that allowed police to hold him. The extradition process was still being worked out, and to the frustration of Sheila's family, he was released. But just a few days later, Josimar went to Interpol headquarters in Lima and turned himself in. Peruvian National Police took him into custody and placed him in preventive detention. Video released by police showed him in handcuffs, wearing clothing marked with an Interpol insignia. Around the same time, authorities confirmed that the couple's 3 children had been located in Peru on August 16th and were taken into protective custody. In December, Josimar was flown back to the United States. He arrived at Los Angeles International Airport, where he was taken into custody and booked on suspicion of murder. Prosecutors allege that on August 10th, inside their apartment in Lancaster, he killed his wife with a knife before disposing of her body and fleeing the country with their children. If Josimar is convicted on all charges, he faces a maximum sentence of 26 years to life in state prison. As of early 2026, the case remains in the pre-trial phase, with evidence being prepared ahead of court proceedings. That evidence includes the surveillance footage from the apartment complex. The couple's 3 children were later reunited with Shayla's family in Southern California. Her mother, Helga Rachillo, has spoken publicly about the case, saying her focus has been on seeking justice for her daughter and ensuring the safety of her grandchildren. The family have also been asking for Shayla's body to be returned to Peru so she can be buried there. As of now, that process is still ongoing. It's a disturbing piece of footage, there's no question about that. But what I think is even more unsettling is how easily this case could have gone on for much longer, or possibly even stalled completely if that recording hadn't existed. When you really think about it, that video ended up being the most compelling piece of evidence investigators had early on. It placed him at the scene and showed the same material that Shayla was eventually found wrapped in. Without that clip, this could have been another case built entirely on conflicting stories and missing time, and no one watching it then could have known that this single piece of footage would later become one of the most disturbing home recordings tied to the case. It was April 19th, 2023, in Burley, Idaho. On a quiet residential street on a Wednesday morning, security footage from inside a family home recorded an unknown man lingering outside the front door. He can be seen standing there for several moments, just out of sight of anyone inside the house and waiting for the right moment. What the family didn't realize at the time was that, shortly after, he'd managed to sneak inside and was planning something incredibly disturbing. There's not a lot of information about the man in the recording, but he was later identified as Brian Vergara. He was 28 years old and lived in Burley, Idaho. While Kiana Mae Greener Gibson, the mother of the family, was in the bedroom, she heard the dog suddenly start barking. It caught her attention, but this was a common occurrence. The dogs often reacted when someone approached the front door, whether it was a delivery driver or someone passing close to the house, and with her focus on her newborn, she didn't think much more about it and stayed where she was. What she didn't know at the time was that outside the front door, a man was lingering. The footage would later show him moving around the entrance while holding a large kitchen knife, pausing near the door before eventually making his way inside. The interior cameras then captured him entering the home, triggering an immediate reaction from the dogs, whose barking grew louder as he stepped into the living room. The man bends down toward Kiana's daughter, speaking to her as the dogs continue barking from their cages, their noise filling the room without anyone else responding. He can be seen patting the little girl on the head before lifting her up. For around 15 seconds, he holds her while the dogs continue barking, before setting her back down on the floor. Moments later, he turns and walks out of the house, leaving the same way he entered. Kiana only became aware that anything was wrong much later, when she received a message from her husband, who was working away from home at the time, asking about a man he had seen standing outside the house on their security cameras. Confused by what he meant, she opened the Rio Lincoln Ring footage from inside and outside the home to see what he was talking about. What she saw made it clear that someone had been inside the house, and that her daughter had been alone with him, without her ever knowing it was happening. We don't know what his intentions were with Kiana's daughter, as there's no statement from him that explains why he entered the house or why he picked her up. But after finding out what he did following this break-in, we can only assume the worst. Later that same morning, at around 10:30 a.m., Vergara entered another home nearby. According to court documents, he raped a 68-year-old woman inside that house. After that, he went into a third home, where he verbally threatened to kill a woman before leaving the property. law enforcement were alerted and began searching the area. Just over an hour later, at around 11:40 a.m., Vergara was located hiding on a nearby property, not far from the scene of the second break-in. After his arrest, Vergara was taken to the Cassia County Jail. While in custody, he continued to act aggressively. According to the affidavit, he repeatedly disobeyed orders from detention staff, at one point biting a deputy's hand and grabbing for another deputy's taser. Officers were able to restrain him before he was able to use it. At a court hearing held shortly after his arrest, Vergara's attorney asked the court for a psychological examination to determine whether he was competent to stand trial. His attorney told the judge that based on his own conversations with Vergara, as well as conversations with Vergara's family members, it was clear that he needed to be evaluated by a mental health professional. In late 2025, Vergara pleaded guilty in Cassia County District Court as part of a plea agreement. He admitted to charges of rape and second-degree kidnapping. Under the terms of that agreement, he faced a potential sentence ranging from 25 years to life in prison. The agreement also required him to undergo a comprehensive psychological evaluation before sentencing, which was scheduled for January 12, 2026. That sentencing date has since passed, but I've been unable to find any official public updates confirming his final sentence. The most recent record I was able to find was a Cassia County Jail roster dated January 20th, 2026, which lists Brian Vergara as incarcerated. As disturbing as everything that followed clearly was, there's still something unsettling about what happened inside that first house, and the fact that it never fully makes sense. Whatever he went on to do later that morning was horrific, but that initial encounter stands out because of how abruptly it ended. Kiana never realized he was inside the home. He wasn't confronted, and nothing forced him to leave. He picked her daughter up, stood there briefly, and then walked away, leaving her exactly where she was. Whether his intention was to take her, hurt her, or something else entirely, is something we'll likely never have an answer to. Since then, Kiana has said she no longer leaves her home unlocked, even when she and her family are inside, and she's urged other parents to take similar precautions. Most mornings followed the same routine inside a home in Farmington Hills, Michigan. Alarms went off at the same time, the day moved quickly, and by around 6:30 a.m., the house was usually empty as everyone headed out the door. But on the morning of August 21st, 2017, that routine broke. Nada Houranier, the mother of the family, never came downstairs. When someone went looking for her, they noticed an open second-story window in a guest bedroom with a ladder and cleaning supplies positioned nearby. Outside, on the patio below, Nada was lying motionless. At first, it looked like a tragic accident, but as investigators began to take a closer look, that explanation started to unravel, and what initially appeared to be a household mishap would become something far more disturbing. Nada Houranier was 35 years old and a mother of 3. She was originally from Syria, where she met her future husband, Bassel Al-Tantawi. They married young and eventually moved to the United States together, both deeply religious at the time, with Bassel going on to open his own urgent care clinic while Nada stayed home to raise their children. Friends remembered her as warm and energetic, and someone who was easy to be around and quick to smile. As her life in the US settled into place, Nada began wanting more independence than she had before, especially outside of her husband's control. Over time, she started building a life that existed beyond the home. She became a certified fitness instructor at the Franklin Athletic Club in Southfield, where she taught group exercise classes and personal training. Around that same period, she stopped wearing her hijab, a decision that reportedly caused tension in her marriage. According to her daughter, Aya Al-Tantawi, arguments between her parents became more intense, and about a year and a half before Nada's death, one of those arguments escalated into a physical altercation. Police were called, and Bassel was charged with domestic violence, later pleading no contest. After that, The marriage continued to deteriorate. Nada and Basil began separating, and she was preparing to move on with her life. Court records show they were in the middle of a contentious divorce at the time of her death, and Basil was no longer living in the family home. Her daughter also later claimed that Nada had begun dating someone she met at the gym, which only added to the strain between her and her husband. By the summer of 2017, the household was already fractured, and by August 21st, that situation took a sudden and irreversible turn. Nada never came downstairs. When her 14-year-old daughter went to check on her, she found her mother lying on the patio outside the house and called the police. Officers arrived to find Nada's 16-year-old son, Mohammed, attempting CPR. Paramedics were unable to find a pulse, and Nada was pronounced dead at the scene. Mohammed told police the last time he saw his mother was around 8 o'clock the night before. He said she must have fallen while cleaning a window in the second-floor guest bedroom. Inside the house, there was an open window, a ladder set up beneath it, and cleaning supplies nearby, which at first made that explanation seem believable. But once investigators looked more closely, the scene didn't add up. There was no blood where Nada landed, and none on her body. The ladder beneath the window was still standing upright, and despite the height of the fall, she was found lying face up. And the autopsy added further doubt. It confirmed that she didn't die from the fall at all. She had been suffocated first, and she had also been struck in the head, and some of the injuries happened while she was still alive. Others happened after she was already dead, when someone was trying to make it look like an accident. From that point on, investigators became suspicious. The first person they considered was her estranged husband. Even though he wasn't living in the house at the time, that alone didn't rule him out, especially given the history between them and the ongoing divorce. But that line of inquiry didn't last long. Records showed that Basil was on probation following the domestic violence charge, and he was wearing a tracking device. Data from that device placed him miles away from the home at the time Nada died, effectively ruling him out as a suspect. Attention then turned to Nada's son, Mohammed. He told investigators that he only learned something was wrong when his sister alerted him to their mother's body on the patio, and that he ran outside to try and help. That explanation didn't immediately conflict with what police knew, but it also didn't answer the growing number of questions surrounding what had happened inside the house. With no clear suspect and a scene that still didn't make sense, investigators continued digging. During that search, investigators discovered a DVR hidden away in the furnace room. Once they recovered it and began reviewing the footage, it became clear that someone had gone out of their way to keep it out of sight. The cameras showed that during the window when Nada died, the only people inside the house were Nada herself, her son Mohammed, and his 2 younger sisters. No one else entered, and no one else left. One of the cameras captured the guest bedroom, where Nada usually got ready in the mornings. The light in that room was on, and although the camera didn't directly show the window itself, it did capture what was happening indirectly. The light from the room cast shadows onto the grass outside, just below the window. In those shadows, detectives could see the outline of a person with short hair lifting something heavy toward the window. Moments later, Nada's body can be seen falling to the ground below. The person seen in the footage was Mohammed. When police told him about the surveillance footage, his story changed. At first, he said he'd been helping his mum clean and that he saw her fall from the window. Later, he said he'd been holding the ladder when it happened. He also told investigators he looked out the window, then said he didn't want to believe what he was seeing. According to that account, he went back inside, took a shower, and went back to bed. Less than a week after Nada's death, Mohammed was unsurprisingly arrested and charged in connection with her murder. By the time the case reached trial, much of the focus had shifted to what could and couldn't be said in court. Mohammed's defense attorney, Michael Sciano, fought to keep his early conversations with detectives out of the case, arguing that investigators had fed him possible explanations while questioning him as a minor. The issue was pushed all the way to the Michigan Supreme Court, and in the end, prosecutors agreed not to use those statements, choosing instead to rely on the physical evidence, the footage, and the timeline. While the case was moving toward trial, Aya remained largely in the dark about what had actually happened to her mother. She believed her father had played some role in influencing her brother. Phone records showed that Muhammad and his father had called or texted each other around 20 times on the morning of the death. But beyond that contact, there was nothing concrete tying Basil to the crime, and he was never charged. When the trial began in 2022, prosecutors entered their case on the breakdown of the relationship between Nada and her son. They pointed to messages and phone records, including the fact that Muhammad had saved his mother's contact name in his phone as Dog, as well as his resentment of her no longer wearing the hijab and distancing herself from their religion. They also argued that he killed her to stop her from testifying in an upcoming divorce deposition involving his father. Jurors were shown surveillance footage from inside the house, including moments where Muhammad appeared to stop performing CPR, even as he continued counting aloud with the dispatcher on the phone. They also saw the footage of the shadow in the window, along with video from 6 cameras showing movement through different rooms of the house in the early morning hours. In a lengthy closing argument, Assistant Prosecutor John Skaczynski walked the jury through what he described as a pattern of lies and inconsistencies. He pointed out that Muhammad had told police he didn't wake up until after 6 a.m., while phone records showed calls with his father beginning around 4:30. He highlighted the position of Nada's body on the patio, which did not match a fall from the window, and the placement of the ladder and cleaning supplies, which appeared untouched. He also noted changes in Muhammad's account of where he was inside the house, conflicts with the lights seen on the surveillance footage, and testimony from his sister, who said he normally showered at night but was showering that morning. Prosecutors also pointed to items found in the laundry room, including clothes and a rubber mat discovered in the washing machine on the day of the death, which were no longer there the following day. Taken together, they argued, the evidence showed planning, staging, and an attempt to explain away what had happened. But the defense pushed back hard, arguing there was no blood, no DNA, no signs of a struggle, or even any direct evidence showing that his client had the physical strength or motive to carry out the crime. In the end, the jury was left to decide which version of events the evidence actually supported. In March 2022, the jury reached its decision. Muhammad was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. He continued to deny killing his mother, both during the trial and after the verdict was read. His sentencing was scheduled for September that year. By the time it happened, he had dismissed his legal team and chose to represent himself. The hearing took longer than expected, with Muhammad repeatedly objecting and challenging the court as the proceedings went on. The judge sentenced him to a term of 35 to 60 years in prison. In delivering the sentence, the judge noted that Muhammad still saw himself as the victim in the case, rather than his mother. As of February 2026, prison records show that Muhammad is serving his sentence at Kinross Correctional Facility in Michigan's Upper Peninsula,